stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
You can start if you wish.
But I'll let. Good afternoon, not good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to today's meeting of the Housing Committee. Members of the public may like to follow at London Assembly on social media using the hashtag London Housing for this meeting. Please can I remind you to switch off your electronic devices, and also that might mean you're keeping your computers away from your microphone so it doesn't interfere with it. We're now going to move on to today's main item of business, which is housing delivery on GLA Group land. Can I start by asking my clerk, Diane Richards, if we've had any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We have no apologies for today's meeting.
Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out in Agenda Item 2 and ask members if they have any other interests to declare? No. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of January 2024? Agreed. Can we note the completed, closed and outstanding actions from previous meetings? Agreed. Right, so we're going to move on to our main course of business here, which is housing delivery on GLA Group land. We have a esteemed panel in front of us. Can I just start by putting on record our thanks to the Deputy Mayor, because every time he's been invited to a panel he has come. I'm pretty sure, at least in my own mind, he has the best attendance record of any Deputy Mayor. So we'd like to say thank you for that before we kick off. Can we also say hello to Lynn Garner, Chief Executive of LLDC and Senior Lead for Housing Delivery on the GLA. Tom Copley, Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development. Tim Steer, Executive Director, Housing and Land, GLA. Marc, Jacquemond, Head of Development, Land and Development for GLA. I'm just pleased that I haven't ruined anyone's name just far. And Graeme Craig, Director of Commercial Development for Transport for London. As is our tradition on the committee, I'll take the first question. And I'd like to address my first question to the Deputy Mayor and also to Tim as well. Has the GLA's plans for housing delivery on its land changed in the last 2 years? And if so, how have these changes manifested themselves? What has been the main changes? I'll start with the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for your warm words to begin with. As a former Assembly member, of course, I do take these sessions and the scrutiny very seriously, so it's good to be with you today for what I think will be my last Assembly appearance before the election.
Yes.
I've got a few opening remarks, if I may, and you know, certainly I will wrap up your opening question into that. I think, first of all, I wanted to pay tribute, you know, given the subject matter of this session, I wanted to pay tribute to the late Lord Bob Kerslake, whose review, of course, is the subject of the session. As many people have recognised since his premature death in July last year, Bob was a hugely knowledgeable, principled public servant, as well as a very warm and generous human being, and we were incredibly lucky to have had the benefit of his sharp mind applied to this topic. The Mayor and I are very clear that to fix the housing crisis requires every part of our housing system to do more, including a much bigger role for the public sector to drive the delivery of new homes, and we include ourselves within the GLA Group as part of that ambition. When Sadiq was elected in 2016, he inherited a system of GLA Group housing delivery that I think was frankly underpowered and underwhelming. It was too fragmented, lacking leadership, and not delivering enough new homes, especially new affordable homes. So I think we've seen huge progress since then. I want to emphasise that, you know, the Kerslake review wasn't year zero. Before the review, we had strong foundations that were laid. So we had a New Homes for Londoners board that had been set up, bringing together different parts of the GLA Group as well as the wider housing sector. Our land fund was established and underway, massively outperforming expectations and indeed pushing the boundaries of what ministers envisaged it would and could do. So we're currently running at 16,000 homes unlocked through the land fund against a target of 8,000, 50% of those being affordable, and a huge amount of that funding being recyclable and in the form of recoverable investments. That's not actually how ministers envisaged that it would work, but indeed we've managed to make it work in such a way. And by contrast, I note that DLUC have failed to get their HIF funding out of the door and have just cut 16 projects covering 42,000 homes. So we'd already set up our pioneering Small Site, Small Builders programme, which I'm sure the committee will want to come to during the session. The LDP2 development framework was up and running. A new LEDU to accelerate delivery on surplus NHS land was up and running. GLAP had already started more than 13,000 homes on its land between 2016 and 2022, and we're now up to nearly 18,000. Building Council Homes for Londoners was expanding local authority capacity and improving the GLA's relationship with boroughs. We'd already improved coordination within the GLA Group on housing delivery. So, for example, I was meeting with TfL, now Places for London, on a monthly basis, MOPAC on a quarterly basis. We developed innovative ways to drive delivery with high levels of affordable housing. So a case study highlighted by Lord Kerslake in his report was the pioneering arrangement through which the GLA provided a guarantee for MOPAC for the land value at their Hendon site. And, of course, we were supporting delivery throughout London as the GLA through our Affordable Homes programme. I think we could have gone even further were we not faced with some anti-development elements within the government. The most egregious case of this, of course, being the decision by the then Secretary of State to block the planning application for the redevelopment of 8 Albert Embankment, the London Fire Brigade site. Had that not taken place, we would have had spades in the ground on that site already. But of course, despite all of this, the Mayor and I are determined to go further and faster on delivery, and the Kerslake review has helped us to build on the strong foundations to date. And I'm pleased there's been progress on all the Kerslake recommendations, which we'll be coming to throughout this meeting, and this is helping us lay the groundwork for a further step change in delivery. And the ambition that the Mayor and I have for housing delivery is matched by enormous potential. So between the GLA, GLAP, Places for London, between just the these two organisations, we were intended to deliver in total nearly 90,000 homes going into the 2040s. So there is huge potential on land under the purview of the Mayor. And having been in post for nearly 4 years, I know it's hard to believe, Chair, but nearly 4 years, coming up to that in March, I'm more convinced than ever, firstly, of the vital role that the GLA and the wider group plays in the housing ecosystem, and secondly, and you won't be surprised to hear me say this, that we need to be given even more powers, funding and freedom.
Thank you. Just a quick circle back to the land fund and what you described as a great level of overperformance. Do you think it's because the initial prediction ask was too low, it was a low ball, and so it was easy to outperform?
No, I don't. Well, bear in mind the target for the land fund, and I will say it was agreed before I started in this role, but it was agreed between the GLA and the government. The government, tends to hold the cards in these sort of negotiations
very kind to the GLA, aren't they?
On targets, and they set a target of 8,000, which we thought was deliverable. The fact that we've overperformed to the extent of doubling that, while at the same time, and just to reiterate, while at the same time delivering 50% affordable, and making most of the investments recoverable. I mean, that's not how the ministers envisaged the fund would operate. They envisaged it would be mostly to support market sale, and that it would go out and not come back. So, I think we've demonstrated, the value of the GLA delivering as a devolved body, and we, of course, would like even more funding. It's a great shame that the government decided not to devolve the £150 million bill investment to the GLA. We've got a great workaround in terms of our relationship with Homes England, but really that wasn't within the spirit of devolution, and we've shown that we can perform.
I mean, from the government's point of view, if you're going to develop a workaround, they probably shouldn't give you that extra money. There's other places they could spend that money.
Well, no, I mean, I would just say, Chair, the arrangement that we have, the legal arrangement is that the GLA is the Housing Investment Authority in London. The government, for I think political reasons, decided that they didn't want to put the money through the GLA, but in order to ensure that London did benefit from this funding, didn't lose out, the Mayor and the GLA were pragmatic and worked with Homes England to ensure that this money will benefit a number of really key sites in London.
I've often praised you for your team's imagination and effectiveness and pragmatism, and I'm not sure it's entirely fair to say the government did those things for political reasons. But moving on, Tim, roughly the same question to you. Any of your musings about how you feel the plans may have changed over the last 2 years, and if so, what are the big sort of sweeping themes that have changed?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's been a really involved couple of years, because this is a moment in the GLAP, the GLA Land Property Delivery Plan, where we've got a whole series of major schemes on the ground delivering, and we have been hit in those projects in exactly the same ways that all developers around London have been hit, and we've talked through those issues before, and we've talked about the kind of perfect storm of issues which are hitting development in terms of regulatory changes and uncertainty around the second staircases, in terms of viability challenges because of high construction costs and high borrowing costs. All of those kinds of issues are affecting the schemes which we've been working on for years, and inevitably those things do risk delay, and they risk and they mean that plans need to change. And I think what we've needed to do over the last couple of years is work really intensively with our delivery partners in our key locations to try to minimise those delays, to try and be pragmatic and creative, as you talked about, in order to ensure that housing delivery can continue as far as possible in the ways that were planned. And so the land and development team here, the team that Marc's in, it's absolutely been focused on those relationships with our partners, particularly working on our biggest schemes, Barking Riverside, Stevenson Street just down the road, Greenwich Peninsula and Silvertown Quays. They've all needed very heavy engagement, and we've needed to be really strategic in our approaches to how we address the challenges that they're facing. You know, they're all very large multi-phase projects which are due to deliver out homes over the coming decade in many cases, and so we need to try and make sure we're taking the right long-term decisions for those projects now to protect delivery and reduce delay, but to really try and protect those outcomes overall around housing delivery and affordable housing delivery, and working within all of the raft of policy and legal and procurement constraints that we face. And so it's been a real challenging period for the team.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you quickly, Tom. You gave a figure of 18,000 homes being delivered. Over what period of time?
Yes, Chair. So we are up to now, since 2016, on GLAP land, so land that is owned by Greater London Land and Property Limited. Just shy of 18,000 homes have been delivered during that period, up from 13,000 when Lord Kerslake published his report. I just want to say as well, Chair, because Barking Riverside has been mentioned, just in the interests of transparency and declarations, to declare I am a board member of Barking Riverside.
Thank you for that. An argument could be made 18,000 is that enough? Could you have done more? It's a big figure, but once you apply the time profile,
all sorts of arguments could be made, Chair. I think the question is whether the argument's a good one or not, and I would suggest that wouldn't be a good argument. I think 18,000 is a very substantial number of homes to be delivered since 2016, and the fact that that's increased, in very difficult circumstances, by around a third since Lord Kerslake published his report in 2022, I think is a huge testament both to the work that's gone on within the GLA and also to our excellent delivery partners on those sites.
Okay, I'm going to allow you that one, Tom. I'll come back and be rough on you later. I'm going to bring you in, Graeme, and just so give you the heads up here. How is GLA Group responding to the government's recent announcement about prioritising house building, house delivery on brownfield sites? What implication does this announcement have for GLA, TfL, LLDC? What implication do you think it has?
On the face of it, it would be very positive news. Inevitably, it's the detail that matters. What we often find is that whilst you can get broad support for the principle of building on brownfield sites, when we bring forward brownfield sites, we do not find in practice always the broad political support. I'm thinking here, for example, of car parks. If I use the specific example at Cockfosters, we got planning approval from the local borough to bring forward 351 homes at Cockfosters. The then Secretary of State for Transport didn't approve the Section 163, which we need in order to take that site forward. We have resubmitted a Section 163. We would hope, given the broadly recognised need for homes to be built in London, particularly on brownfield sites, that Section 163 application will be accepted. But yeah, it's the environment. I just want to back up what Tim and Tom have said. The environment has been difficult over the last 2 years. It has been a struggle with high inflation feeding through to construction, high interest rates, particularly delays on second staircase. So we, within our portfolio, have had over 2,000 homes that, to some extent, have been impacted by those factors.
Graeme, sorry, can I just cut across you there?
Of course you can.
Sorry, excuse me. You say about second staircase delivery and the confusion, and the Deputy Mayor's made a very strong case for that in the past. But of course, when the Mayor mandated a second staircase, he never provided any details either. So did that impact in the same way, or did it not?
Where we have been impacted is, I think, a consultation that began over 12 months ago with initially lack of clarity as to whether it was above 18 metres or 30 metres. Is it second staircase? Is it second core? Are redundant lifts required? We are building buildings that will be around for decades to come. We, of course, want to make sure that they're safe, but really we need absolute clarity from government down on what those building regulations are going to be. It's We are in commercial partnerships with the leading developers in London. We need to be in a position in which we and they understand the rules of the game. I know that across London there was 34,000 homes that were impacted by the uncertainty, and we're affected just the same as everyone else is.
I accept that, and like I say, the Mayor's been very convincing. And when I sat in front of, the Deputy Mayor, when I sat in front of the Secretary of State, I asked that very same question. My real point, and maybe the Deputy Mayor can answer it, why, when the Mayor does the same thing, we don't speak about it having any effect? I'm
happy to come in on this. Look, the history here is the government, as Graeme has pointed out, more than 12 months ago in December, on the 23rd of December 2022, launched this consultation on second staircases at over 30 metres, with the very strong signal that this would be there would be a very quick transition period. It would be brought in rapidly. It would have been, I think, untenable for the Mayor not to respond to that by making the statement that the Deputy Mayor for Planning and I put out regarding referrals of planning applications with buildings over 30 metres, because the London plan is very clear. The Mayor expects the higher standard, the London plan requires, I should say, the higher standards of fire safety. Of course, it turned out there was not a quick transition period, and by July last year, the Secretary of State got up and made a speech in which he said the threshold would actually be 18 metres. Now, during that time, many of our development partners had redesigned buildings to put in the second staircase over 30 metres. They were suddenly faced now with having to then redesign buildings again and put in a second staircase over 18 metres. So the situation had completely changed. It was not, as I say, as set out when the consultation was launched. There was not a short consultation period. The government failed to publish any detailed guidance or indeed transitional arrangements. In fact, we only got the transitional arrangements a few months ago. So, you know, the Mayor was responding to this government consultation.
Again, Chair, you and I, again, Deputy Mayor, you and I have had this conversation. And it's very, you know, it's your job to make everything the government's fault. But it's incredible to me that nobody seemed to have a problem when the Mayor did it, and that's my point. But
the Mayor was Chair. The Mayor was responding to a signalled change in national policy. Which did not move forward in the way that it was envisaged, i.e. there was no short transition period. This has been dragging on and on and on. And the department, which is responsible for the building regulations, bearing in mind the Mayor is not responsible for building regulations, the government is responsible for building regulations. The government have not got on and published the technical details that are required.
I know.
The Mayor had to act in planning terms in accordance with his planning policy, which is the policy on the higher standards of fire safety.
Okay. I've asked him directly. I have some sympathy for what you're saying, not entirely, but I give you Assembly member definition.
I don't know what the Deputy Mayor will do if we have a Labour government. He won't be to say it's the government's fault. It would be absolutely disastrous.
Tony, I can't wait, Tony.
So,
I can't wait.
Not that there's going to be a Labour government, obviously. Just on a point you pointed out earlier, Deputy Mayor, and good afternoon, by the way. You talked about 8 embankments. I was very disappointed at the London Fire Brigade plenary where the Commissioner, frankly, basically said, and I'm not misquoting him, we're really busy on fire matters. We're not going to do anything about building out any of our estate at all. It's all operational. And he didn't really have a plan for 8 embankment. Do you have a plan for 8 embankment that's actually going to go forward now?
I didn't see. I have to confess I wasn't tuned into the fire committee, but I would be shocked if that is what the Commissioner said. I had a meeting with the Commissioner. It was only a matter of weeks ago to discuss 8 Albert embankment. We're actually making some really good progress here, in spite of the best efforts of the government, of course, who, as you know, Mr. Jenrick rejected homes that could have been underway by now. I had a very good meeting with the Commissioner the other week. This is actually an excellent example.
No, committee member, no.
I think he's standing to be the leader of the Conservative Party after the election, Assembly Member Cooper. But I just want to emphasise, because we are here to talk about Kerslake and collaboration, this is actually a very good example of GLA Group collaboration. A member, first of all, of the Places for London team was seconded over to the Fire Brigade to work on this. Now now a member of the GLA Land and Development team, is working on this. We've been making some very good progress lately. We expect to have a planning application in before the end of this year, I think is the aim. And, you know, I would have to look at the transcript of what the Commissioner says, but I really can't believe that he said that they weren't paying attention to this. This is a really big priority for the fire brigade, not least because of the presence of the fire station.
It was the fire plenary, and please do look at the transcript, because I was quite shocked, actually, that basically I said that when I was chairman of the Regen Committee, and I won't prolong this, the fire brigade were the only part of the GLA that weren't taking development seriously, and he basically agreed with me and said they weren't going to be building anything on any other part of their estate. But I'll let you have another conversation with him.
All I can say to you, Assemblyman Devonish, is that I literally had a meeting with him a few weeks ago to discuss this specifically at his request. So I'm pretty sure that he is taking a keen interest in this. But I will look at the transcript.
Thank you very much. So my question that's on the paper in front of me, which is to you, Deputy Mayor, and also to Tim, how have market conditions affected the forecast cash flows for housing schemes on GLA lands, please?
Forecast cash flows for housing. So are you talking here about specific cash flows of specific developments?
Well, overall, really, but you can give us examples from specific developments to illustrate the point, if you like.
I'll bring Marc in on this one.
Can I just mention, though, before Marc comes in, there are significant commercial sensitivities with some of this.
Really, I was going to say we can't. Yeah.
Well, give us what you can, Marc. Give us a flavour, I think is the term they would use.
Quite a lot of this is live discussion.
Yeah, and to be clear, if you can't, then don't. But
of course. I mean, broadly, and it is affecting pretty much every single project, cost inflation has been in the double digits. Profit levels would be expected to be in the same levels of double digits. And revenue has not increased over the period. So effectively, profits have been compressed to the point that projects that were once viable are not as viable as they used to be. And that's just inflation on costs. You've got inflation on base rates, which is effectively damaging viability beyond that. And then we've got programs for construction that are getting delayed because projects are having to go back through planning because of second staircases. And the lack of regulatory certainty, these projects cannot go through the planning process. So effectively, we're just incurring costs and revenues are getting deferred. And the costs are inflating at a higher rate than revenues. So the situation is really serious. We're doing everything we can to support projects, and they're going through redesigns at the moment and potentially contractual changes where it's required. But it is a serious situation, and I'm sure that this is the experience across the board at LLDC and PFL.
Great. I think my next question is you're going to say exactly the same, really. I'll ask it anyway, and you can just tell me that we can move on, which is what discussions have you had with development partners and third parties around responding to market conditions, and how have plans for specific sites changed? Maybe Graeme could answer that.
Well, first of all, just to agree with what Marc's said, it is a challenging time. It's headwinds, the like of which I think the industry's not seen in very many years. Funding costs are higher, construction costs are higher, the regulatory uncertainty that I mentioned before. It is worth, I think, emphasising the fact that I think we are more joined up than we ever have been before. So we're sharing information, we're sharing intelligence, we're talking to each other. We're also, I think, providing a united front to the market, which is helpful. One of the things within Places for London that we have stated clearly is that we will not be, though we are commercially funded, we will not operate like a commercial developer in certain respects. And one element of that is we are keen to develop through the cycle. We won't wait until times get good and then start to build. London needs homes. Therefore, on specific sites, and I can't share in a public session the specific examples, but we have taken a hit on the land value for sites for the sake of being able to bring sites forward, because those sites are now worth worth less because of construction cost inflation, because of funding and other pressures, and because we don't want to reduce down the level of affordable housing. The only movement that we've been able to bear is the impact on land value. So it is having an impact. We are working hard to ensure that we minimise the impact on our homes delivery, but the consequential impact of that is we have had to accept some reductions in the value of our land.
Can I come in on this as well, please, Assembly Member Devonish? Yes, I mean, as Marc mentioned just then, of course, the rising financing costs. It would be remiss of me not to point out that this followed the disastrous mini-budget, Assembly Member Devonish. But the,
you don't need to say these things. I know what you're going to say.
You knew what I was going to say, didn't you? But no. But in all seriousness, no. The extra cost of finance is having an enormous impact, of course, not just on projects the GLA and the GLA Group are involved in, but across the board as well. Developers are really struggling with those costs. But I do think it's worth pointing out that, and reiterating, the support that the City Hall, the GLA Group, working collaboratively, has been able to provide our development partners to help them through what is an extremely difficult time, as we know, has been really well received across our sites, whether that's helping developers in terms of new planning permissions, at Barking Riverside, where we've just gone out to consultation to really up the density on the site there. The work we've been doing at Greenwich Peninsula with Night Dragon and L&Q. I mean, we have been putting an awful lot of effort into supporting our development partners, so that when we emerge from the darkness, we are ready to hit the ground running and to be in a really strong position once the market improves.
I'll just finally say, Deputy Mayor, you'd obviously wanted to thank the government for the £9 billion that you've had, and I'll pass back to the Chair.
It's not enough. It's not enough. We know it's not enough, and the entire sector have been saying, I mean, they wrote to the Secretary of State the other day, it's not enough.
You can always ask for more, and we'll always support you in that more, but you do have to acknowledge you've been given half of all of public funds for affordable homes.
We weren't actually, Chair. In the last affordable homes programme, London's share was cut to 35%.
Yeah, well, you were given half before, and you had your target reduced to make it happen. So let's be clear: the government have been playing ball. Even if you want to make it big, but I give you Assembly Member Moema.
Good afternoon, panel. I just wanted to ask Tom and Tim. The chair asked about the government's announcement around prioritising delivering brownfield land. Maybe I don't know if there is anything in addition to that you might want to add about what the risks and challenges might be, what you might foresee from that announcement.
I would love to come in on that point, Assembly Member Moema. Look, something like 99.8% of development in London is already on brownfield land. We are already delivering substantially on that land. The problem that we have got is that it's not really in terms of getting sort of the planning permission on brownfield land. The problem we've got is that sites that already have planning permission are stalled, and they're stalled for a number of reasons that we're all aware of: second staircases, regulatory uncertainty, and also a lack of support in terms of funding, rising interest rates, all of these things. It is the macroeconomic situation and the lack of a robust government response and intervention to this is the problem. And I'm afraid that this announcement that there was much sort of fanfare in the run-up to this announcement by the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State. I'm afraid it really fell flat. This is not the intervention that was required. The intervention that was required was to get on with dealing with the regulatory uncertainty and to provide the funding and the investment that the sector needs, whether that be affordable housing funding or brownfield infrastructure funding or the funding that we need for things like the DLR extension. Those are the things that would have really moved the dial, not this kind of fiddling around the edges with the National Planning Policy Framework.
Thank you. And so if I could, I don't know if this is probably best placed to Marc, given that you've commented on the finances. If there are any policies or interventions that would assist in overcoming current market conditions?
I sort of think we've covered it. I think that they're contained actually, the interventions within the Housing Delivery Task Force recommendations that I know the committee will have seen and will be aware of. I mean, a big headline one from that, of course, was a 2.2 billion that we need to get us back up to the 35,000 affordable housing target, for example, interventions to reduce the cost of borrowing for boroughs in the Public Works Loans Board, allowing councils to combine right to buy receipts with our grant. There's a huge amount of sorting out investment in planning departments to get the planning system moving. All sorts of interventions there. I think it is unfortunate that the Secretary of State has sort of rejected pretty much all of those out of hand.
Thank you.
Did you want to come in, Tim?
Well, I think the only one that you didn't mention in your list, Tom, was as well as the quantum of funding, but just some more longer-term certainty on funding would be really, really helpful. Yes. You know, we at the moment the Affordable Homes Programme runs until March 2026, and our partners don't have any guarantees of funding beyond that. And given that the schemes we are working on and working with partners on are often such long-term schemes, you know, that lack of certainty really does affect the confidence with which partners can go forward, particularly in these types of times.
So what? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was also going to add, you know, the Land Fund was extremely successful because it provided development finance to partners. And, you know, in day-to-day kind of conversations with development partners, they're looking for more. They want us to partner with them. They want revolving cash facilities, development finance on projects, etc. And it's not available. We don't have the money to do it, unfortunately. And Homes England, unfortunately, also tends to land on market-facing conditions, which means that in a high-interest environment, they're charging high interest, which is not necessarily helping in the current process and system that we're facing, whereas the GLA has been able to provide subsidised loans in the past. That would be very meaningful, I think.
Okay, and to your point, Tim, about the length of the funding period for the AHP, what length of AHP or funding period would be helpful to the sector?
Well, I think it's just some certainty that there's going to be a programme going forward shouldn't be hard to provide. I think
it's not having to start again each time.
Yes, exactly. And what we'd ultimately want, I think, particularly given the devolution arrangements in London, is give us some certainty around the funding, give us some flexibility on how to use it, and then allow us to be creative in the kinds of environment that we are. And then if we want to use the funding for the kind of development finance loans that Marc's talked about, then we can do it for that. Or if we want to use it in other ways, then we can. But at the moment, we're very, very constrained. We've got these short AHP programs with very tight MOUs and conditions on the funding, and it just doesn't allow us to be responsive in the kinds of situation that we're in now.
Deputy Mayor, before you come in, Deputy Mayor, Tim, but you still never gave a length of time. Come on, if you can't give one, then they won't give you one. If you see what I mean, give them something to aim at.
Well, I mean, I remember there was a time when TfL had a 10-year funding deal, and I think that really had allowed TfL to plan for the long term. I mean, if we had that kind of certainty, then that would make a big difference.
There you go, because
that's the kind of scale of time. That's the kind of timescale that these projects go for.
But that kind of response is useful because at least we can ask for something. If you have enough to ask for, you will never get anything. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years would be fantastic, and I think what that would also do is avoid, you know, as we say, the hockey stick that you get with programs going like this. We'd be able to sort of, with certainty, even out delivery a lot more over that time period. And I think that point that Tim touched on there around flexibility in terms of our programs is really important as well. We are really well placed as the GLA, talking to our partners to be able to respond to changing market conditions, and I think we need more freedom from the government to be able to adapt our programs to changing market conditions, adapt the frameworks and the requirements without having to constantly go back to the department and wait for sign-off, particularly if it's ministerial sign-off, because that always takes longer. I think we need to be trusted to be able to take those decisions here and then to be judged on our performance. Judges on our performance. I think that's the crucial thing.
Okay. Thank you all. So my next question is to you, Graeme, and just wanted to know what steps you've taken to ensure Places for London's target of will meet its target of 20,000 homes by 2031.
Okay, well, I probably should just go back and I think that, I can't remember whether being in front of the committee in this new guise, but since April 2022, we've been financially independent of TfL. So we now take no funding from TfL. We pay TfL a dividend. Critically, that means that from a funding point of view, we have the ability to plan long term. We're no longer in competition with Transport for funding. TfL is sadly not in a position in which it's these days able to plan 10 years in advance. TfL's funding has been at most over 12 months. We at least have had the ability to plan long term. As members of the committee may know, we increasingly work on large-scale joint ventures. We now have 7 joint ventures up and running. The largest of those 2 are at Earl's Court with Delancey and at Edgware with Ballymore, and we're looking to bring forward planning for 7,500 homes this year on those 2 sites. We also have 3 multi-site joint ventures. One of those is for commercial office, but so if I concentrate on the 2 residential-led joint ventures, we have a joint venture with Barratt London. We've completed the site at Black Horse View, 350 homes, 50% affordable. We're on site and making great headway with 454 homes at Wembley Park. Works have started at Debolo Lane near Acton Town. That's a further 900 homes. We're then working with Barratt London on what we're calling the West London Partnership, where we're seeking to deliver a further 3,000 homes across West London. With over £100 million of local transport improvements delivered as part of those schemes at the same time. We also have a joint venture on build to rent with Granger. That is currently on site 1,240 homes, and subject to getting the green light on the section 163 at Cockfosters, that will be a further 351 homes, so 1,591 homes that we can bring forward with them. We have a commitment we've made to bring forward 20,000 homes over the course of the 10 years from the setting up of Places for London. We've completed or started construction on 4,295 of those. We are on track to hit the 20,000 homes, but with everything that's been said, the more that we can have certainty, or our development partners can have certainty on things like funding, the more the wider macroeconomic position eases, the more comfortable we will be about hitting that 20,000 target.
Okay, thank you. That Black Horse View development sounds like it's in my constituency, so I'll be very interested in that, in particular after this. But linked to, we have a budget coming up, hopefully the last one of this government, but we know that there have been lots of difficulties, lots of difficult market conditions that the sector has had to deal with for the last 18 months. Have there been any changes to TfL's forecasted income from its housing programme as a result of that?
We have a commitment to TfL to deliver a dividend. So again, just to repeat, we take no funding from TfL. We pay TfL a dividend. The dividend that we pay TfL is actually the profit from our recurring revenue. So that's the income that we make from our 1,500 tenants across London. Yes, 95% of which are SMEs. So the money that we make from that rent roll is what goes to TfL as a dividend. Where we make one-off capital receipts, including through joint ventures or indeed disposals, that's recycled within Places for London. It's that means that we are able to self-fund our delivery of homes. it's that means that we're no longer in competition with transport for funding. Things are tough. We're having to make difficult choices, but we have been able to maintain the dividend that we pay TfL, and we have been able to continue to make the investment in homes.
Great. And then my final question to you, Graeme, is what is TfL doing, stroke Places for London, doing to prevent issues around delays on sites? And some of your starts have been pushed back in the last quarter, pushed into 23-24, sorry. Last year when you came, you said that there were some sites that hadn't gone through planning. Just wondering what mitigations you have in place to deal with that.
The biggest mitigation that we have is, as a joint venture partner, we have full visibility. The sites that actually have where there have been most delays is where we have disposed of sites, and it is then wholly on the part of the joint venture, or sorry, not the joint venture, wholly on the part of the developer to take it forward. If we remain a joint venture partner, if we remain having a seat at the table where we can engage, including with colleagues across the rest of the GLA family, to understand how we can mitigate impacts, how we can ensure that sites are taken forward. You've heard already the challenges the sector has. I don't for a second underplay those. Ultimately, I'm focused on the delivery of the 20,000 homes over 10 years. Some sites will move to the right because of issues. Other ones will be able to be brought forward. Our overarching aim is making sure that we can hit that 20,000 target and ultimately get homes built as quickly as we can.
Very, very short intervention from Assembly Member.
Yeah, I just want to come back to the whole timeline that you were talking about there, Tom, of getting more flexibility and longer periods of delivery and avoiding the hockey stick. Now, I think as an Assembly, we've potentially found the hockey stick side of things a little bit useful, as in, you know, we are confident you're going to make a big sprint towards that deadline. And I know that for the 2021 to 26 AHP, we've been asking you for a timeline of your own timeline of delivery within that overall deadline for some time, and we haven't had it yet. Would a 10-year time scale not mean that we wait 10 years before we eventually see a sudden delivery, or do you think
No,
that you would be able to work with the Assembly to provide things we can hold you to account in between? Because that's what we are struggling with, that with the 21 to 26.
Yeah, so the reason why it's been difficult, if not impossible, to provide you with an annual delivery profile for the current programme is simply because of the market uncertainty at the moment. It's very, very difficult for us to be able to provide that information. I don't think that would mean that if we had a 10-year programme, we wouldn't be able to do that, subject to the market conditions. But also, it would allow us to work with delivery partners to plan things much more for the longer term, and particularly where we're dealing with, very large, long-term, complex, multi-phase projects. There would be huge benefits of that. We ourselves, though, and we do this within programmes anyway, would still want to be holding partners to account for specific milestones and specific delivery deadlines. But we do that anyway. Even within the programme, partners will be expected to deliver, against certain milestones within certain time frames. Otherwise, we may say to them, well, look, we have to take the funding back and give it to someone who can deliver.
No, I mean, I agree with you that the longer
Assembly Member,
certainty. Can I possibly...
No, actually, no. I think the Deputy Mayor gave quite a full answer. I'd like to move on.
Do this to me every meeting, Chair. I just want to register a bit of a protest that I don't get to do, the actual job
to be clear,
sometimes.
I've given you an extra come in. You still have your question to come, so please don't suggest I'm not letting you participate.
I'm going to write to the Deputy Mayor about this matter on my own account then.
Excellent. What a fabulous idea. Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you. I was originally going to address this to Tim Steer and Tom Copley as well, but I think you've already really commented on the last 18 months from the last time that the Housing Committee looked at the Kerslake review. However, Lynn, we haven't pestered you yet about this. What progress... Yes, you're getting off very easily. Now it's I know I'm going to come to you. What progress to date do you think has been made by the GLA Group against the Kerslake recommendations?
I think we've done quite well. A couple of my colleagues have mentioned it already. We're far more joined up as a bunch of leaders of what are essentially 4 different development companies with their own governance, with their own salary structures and their own terms and conditions. We've done a lot of work on the talent side of things. We immediately responded to Lord Kerslake's recommendations on governance. So the Deputy Mayor has put a subcommittee in place with external scrutiny where we are monitoring the progress of the GLA Group in the round. We're problem solving. We're having a look at new initiatives and working together in that space, because Lord Kerslake was very conscious that that level of scrutiny was not happening at the Homes for Londoners board because there was other business to do and so on. So that's given us a lot more time. That's worked really well. We have an informal leadership group where we as leaders from each of the 4 entities, plus the really critical element of strategic planning, without which we cannot get development done. Lucinda Turner joins us as well for directional meetings in terms of where we are taking these individual businesses. And all of the parts of the GLA have signed up to the Statement of Shared Policy to ensure that on public land they will deliver 50% affordable housing. And for anybody who read the Kerslake review, there were some comments in the review about some fragmentation in that regard from various entities. We've made huge progress on the sharing of expertise, as Graeme mentioned. We have one network of expertise that's just flying and being really successful, and that's for design. We have planning in the wings and land assembly as a third one. And we have a huge programme of work around talent and retention of staff, which is also starting to work really well. That kind of gives you a bit of a flavour.
Yeah, a bit of a flavour. I'll just dig into that a tiny bit more. You were appointed as the senior professional lead for GLA Group housing delivery in 2022. So since then, so I suppose, 18 months, 2 years, what progress do you feel has been achieved against the original set of priorities?
Quite a lot. I was asked to lead the programme, but I do have a day job. And so I agreed to do it. I agreed to do it 1 day a week. And what I've done is come together with my colleagues, and we've split the recommendations between us, to be honest with you. So I focused on some things in the main and the overall leadership and overview of all of the programme across all of the companies, and colleagues have picked up other strands. So, for example, work with regard to small sites and LDP procurement and the City Hall developer all sit with the GLA, although I have oversight of those pieces of work, and other pieces like talent and governance and being visible in this space have sat with me. And what I have to say is that the leaders of each organisation have responded really well to the call for better collaboration, and without them, we just wouldn't have made the progress that we've made. So it is fragmented in the sense that we've got different people leading on different things, but we have a whole systems overview of what we're doing under the governance of the Deputy Mayor, who obviously sees everything that's happening.
I'll just come to Tom and Tim, if I may. And in fact, actually, you might want to just close your ears right at this moment, Lynn, or just go deaf if you don't mind. What impacts for housing delivery do you think have been enabled through the creation of Lynn's role? How's she getting on?
Well, I think Lynn mentioned she does this in 1 day a week. Well, she packs an extraordinary amount into that 1 day a week, I must say. And I think Lynn, it obviously brings an enormous amount of experience in, development itself, but also, has, I think, great authority and has brought people together and, banged heads together, I suppose, at some points as well, to get us into a really good place. And I think the one thing I don't actually think that Lynn mentioned it just now, but I think that she's made real fantastic progress on, has been the talent side, has been looking at, you know, these 4 organisations, as she mentioned, how we can become much more integrated, work more closely together, create opportunities for staff to move between them, to go on secondments, and that's all really important. It's important that people are talking to each other. It's important that different parts of the organisation understand each other, and that people feel they can pick up the phone to someone even in another part of the organisation, in another part of the GLA group, and I think Lynn's really brought that on in leaps and bounds. I think the statement of shared policy, getting everybody signed up to that, was really important, because that sets out a very important statement of intent, particularly around affordable housing and things like sustainability, stuff like that. The Housing Delivery Forum, and remember Lynn's vice chair of that, and makes a very large contribution to what goes on within the subcommittee, I think has really come into its own recently. Like all things like that, it takes a little while for people to sort of get comfortable with each other and really bring stuff to the table. But I think it's really, in the last few meetings in particular, come on in leaps and bounds, and we've been able to have some really useful deep dives into different parts of what's going on in different parts of the GLA Group development programme, even individual schemes and things like that. So I think we've come a long way. And then there's the other elements of the review as well, which were around our collaboration with local government,
externally,
with stakeholders, with the government. I mean, that in particular, the piece on local government and other stakeholders, the Housing Delivery Task Force, I think, was an exemplar of the GLA working in partnership with those organisations to really speak with a united voice as London. So I'm sure that members will have questions on particular recommendations, and my colleagues might want to come in on some recommendations in particular. But I think we've made great progress, and Lynn's been absolutely central to that.
Tim, I don't know whether you want to add anything else. Do you think that Lynn's appointment has been able to... I mean, it sounded really from what the Deputy Mayor was just saying, that moving from the GLA group to, as some people do like to call it, the GLA family, and actually making it a much more productive relationship between the various different relatives, parts, anyway, but also the external relationships as well. Is there anything that you want to add to those?
Yeah, I was just going to pull out a bit more of what Tom said on the first of your points there around the fact that we're all doing similar things, and I think in the past we would have, in this period where delivery has been really challenging and there have been schemes and homes at risk, I think in the past we'd have probably been doing that, responding to that each in our own places, probably coming to similar conclusions and doing similar things. But it's been so valuable to be able to work to understand as a family, what our most challenging schemes are, what the first priorities for support should be, when we've got limited bits of funding, as we did through the Brownfield Infrastructure and Land Fund, where that should go, and have a kind of develop consensus around that, share expertise, talk through with with planning colleagues how we best work with planning in these really difficult kind of scenarios. All of that, I think, has had a really genuine material impact on our ability to protect delivery on some of these schemes that we're working on at the moment.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be in a different place. I certainly remember talking to Graeme, I think, when he was first came in to TfL all those years ago, and I mean, it's really interesting listening to the way that you're talking about that in terms of the development of the shared objectives and sort of having that sort of engagement between you and the opportunities for learning. I'll bring you both in and start with
I was just going to give a concrete example. So the governance of Places for London is through a committee of the TfL board, the Land and Property Committee, and Lynn sits on that board. So that means that Lynn is fully involved in the creation, the sign-off of the strategy for everything that Places for London does. And we absolutely welcome Lynn's engagement, in part because of her role, but more because of the wealth of skills and experience that she brings. It's partly down to the role being created, but I think as much or more is down to the approach that Lynn has taken. I think it has been seen absolutely as being value adding across all the different members of the family.
Thanks.
I just wanted to add a small point, but probably one that doesn't really get discussed. We're actually saving taxpayers' money by doing this too. We're sharing expertise within the group. We're sharing past lessons, legal advice, templates. These are things that we were not doing before. So our legal fees are going down for solicitors, but we're being more efficient about how we spend our money too.
I think we all like the idea of not paying the lawyers quite as much money, but thanks very much for the answers to my questions, and it's nice to hear that Sir Bob has had a material impact, but I'm going to pass back to the Chair now for some more questions on
Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to go back to thinking about the creation of the subcommittee that you chair, Lynn. And I know you've talked a little bit about how this follows a recommendation that Kerslake made of better coordination, and it enables sort of closer oversight across the board. And you've just discussed that with my colleague. I want to ask how that enhances accountability, though. Do you feel like there's enough that your committee produces that enables someone from outside, maybe the Homes for Londoners board, which you report to really see what's going on, or does it create a bit of a silo where people are not able to see in as easily? That is one of the dangers I can see. I'm not accusing you of it. I'm saying that's the potential danger of creating more and more sort of side committees when you've got the Homes for Londoners board, which I support fully, and I'm very pleased that we have representatives on there from the London Housing Panel who represent, but they're not on your committee, they're on the Homes for Londoners board. So are you confident that there is enough accountability that follows the creation of this extra oversight?
I think so. Tom chairs it, I'm the vice chair. So we've got boroughs on there, we've got health representatives, we have a member of the G15, chair of the G15 or the deputy chair attending. So we've got good people around the table. One of the things that struck me very early on is the way that the GLA was historically monitoring progress around the family, just me giving you a couple of examples, was different for each of the group entities. So there was no very single line of sight of progress. So we've spent quite a lot of time building a single monitoring system that is capable of looking across these 4 development entities with a traffic light system to see where all of their schemes are. It's heinously complicated and is still in development, but it does give us a single tool to put before that committee so that they can properly scrutinise what these GLA entities are doing in terms of the production. And before that was difficult because we had one system for looking at the GLA numbers and a different one for LLDC. And I don't think that gives clarity to the wider world, essentially. So we've got a good monitoring tool. Great.
So that creates a bit of consistency of reporting,
well, totally.
Maybe competition between the different parts.
But totally. But also, to Tim's point, when cash is really under strain and you want to intervene in a project, you can clearly see where you're going to get better bang for your buck. If you can see across the whole piece what's going on and what's stalling and so on in a very clear way. So I think the basic monitoring framework's been a very important piece of work, so we've all got clear line of sight of what we're dealing with. Underneath the committee, we have a working group, collaborative professional community where people who report to us do the work of this, so they work with the monitoring framework and make recommendations. We've got a whole systems approach here. And then the other thing I would mention is Tom mentioned that we bring schemes through and we share them with the group, and we've had quite a bit of feedback on sort of problem-solving approaches. So recently we've looked at, I think it was Greenwich Peninsula that we looked at a few months ago, and the next time we come, that I think is going to be lots of interest in, is Graeme's going to come and do a presentation around Places for London's collaboration with Network Rail. And this is a huge opportunity, as you might imagine, if we think about the land ownerships across both of those organisations. But it's also very important to the partners around the table who sit in a borough or who sit in the health authority, because there will be opportunities across those land ownerships to join some of that up. So that's a huge piece of work, but we want to start that conversation at that subcommittee and then put a working group around what we might do geographically to join up some of the big pieces of public land opportunities we have in London. We're not only dealing with GLA land, we can go further using the expertise we have around the table with partners. So that gives you two kind of examples of where the group's able to bring a bit more meaning to the conversations and move things on.
That's really interesting. And again, you know, being able to share that with the wider community of people involved in homes, including the grassroots, people who live in the homes eventually, is really helpful. I remember a very early committee meeting, which obviously Tom Copley was at, where we talked about the problems with working closely with Network Rail and how that needed to be solved in 2017, something like that. Okay, brilliant. I'm just going to move on very quickly now to my next question, which is based around Kerslake's recommendation 6, which I'm going to read out in full. This says the GLA Group should build stronger and more equal relationships with London local government, as well as community, charity and business stakeholders, and also the wider recommendation that engagement with central government ought to be improved. So I guess this is a question to Tom Copley principally. What have you done to strengthen relationships with central government, and what more needs to be done?
Did you want to start with central government specific?
I want to start with central government first. I'll come on to the other levels in a second.
Yes, so I mean, politics aside, I think there are some really, really good relationships that Tim and the team has with DLUC officials, and those are really, really important because, you know, as I've touched on earlier, you know, obviously DLUC holds quite a lot of the cards when it comes to, you know, granting us funding flexibilities and things like that. And I think Tim and team, and Tim I'm sure will talk a bit more about this, do a great job making that case, providing the evidence where flexibilities within our programme would be beneficial, and indeed securing those flexibilities. As you know, there have been a number of changes that the government have agreed to the programme since it was first set up, not least the reprofiling exercise that was undertaken in response to changing market conditions. Now, there are, of course, issues, and, you know, we've talked about the brownfield land funding. You know, the officials at DLUC had worked very, very closely with GLA officials over the period of a year on the basis that it would be devolved to the GLA. A decision was taken elsewhere that it wouldn't be, but following that decision, we didn't just throw our toys out the pram and you know, walk away. We worked constructively with the department to ensure that London would still benefit from that funding. It would just benefit via Homes England. And I think, you know, it might not be the ideal situation that we would have wanted, because I believe in devolution, and the spirit of devolution is it should have come here. But we will still benefit from that funding. And of course, we did benefit from the £53 million of OPDC bill funding that did flow through the GLA, and which OPDC are doing fantastic things with in terms of land acquisition. So yes, we can put the politics to some extent aside, look at what's going on elsewhere in terms of the relationships, and there have been, you know, some positives, notwithstanding the fact that the politics is still important, and you know, we did write to the Secretary of State with the recommendations from the Housing Delivery Task Force, which, if you want to talk about stronger collaboration with local government and with other stakeholders, was a real triumph, I think. And unfortunately, the Secretary of State didn't give us what we were wanting on that front. But that's not to say that there haven't been successes despite that.
Great. And before I shift over to Tim, which I will do in a moment, and talk about local government, can I check, because obviously within transport, a different part of the GLA, we've been kind of at the whim of Secretaries of State a little bit.
Yes.
You've had more stability. To what extent do you think those relations depend on the Secretary of State, or are they deeper than that?
I think Secretaries of State are no doubt but I mean, institutionally, amongst you know, what am I trying to say here? I think that, you know, regardless of who the Secretary of State is, there are ongoing, continuing and constructive relationships between officers on our side and officials on the DLUC side. Not to say that there'll always be agreement, but I think that there's good relationships. I do think that the person that holds the role of Secretary of State, though, is very important. And I think the example of that I would use, actually, is the sort of shift in terms of the prioritisation of where our affordable housing funding should go. So under Robert Jenrick, for example, the sort of the be-all and end-all really was intermediate, low-cost home ownership, first homes for a while, although thankfully we didn't end up getting those in London. Michael Gove's taken a different view, and we've now negotiated flexibility to go up to 60% and above on social rent if the market, if our delivery partners will support that, which broadly they're very happy with. So I think that does demonstrate that it is, the person who is holding the office of Secretary of State, is quite crucial.
Excellent, thank you very much. And of course, also the Treasury, and I had a very productive conversation with the Mayor about making a business case for further investment in acquisitions, which we're waiting for the results of that work to come through as well.
They moved on acquisitions as well, as you know.
Yeah,
initially, they were much more strict on acquisitions. They moved on that as well. And I think a big part of that is that we have evidenced the case for why this is important and why it makes a difference.
Great, and may you continue to do so.
And we will.
Moving over to Tim now. If you want to comment on that, as well as the task force and particularly local government, that would be really good for this short answer, please.
Yeah, so just a quick point on central government first. I think one of the things the report talked about, the Kerslake report talked about, was kind of siloed communications from different parts of the group with central government. I think that's one thing that we've really clearly addressed. We spend a lot of time at our leadership group meetings that Lynn's talked about, discussing what our priorities for engagement at a strategic level with government should be, and that allows me to then kind of channel the group's priorities in the engagement which we lead with government, and so I think that has shifted that kind of siloed thing, although obviously individual contact still continues, and it's right that OPDC is talking to government about its own particular land arrangements over there, and it's right that TfL continues to talk to government about the TfL funding deal and all the rest of it. So those things carry on, but at strategic level around housing delivery, we know what we want as a group, and we know how we're going to say it, and I think that's really helped. In terms of just as one other thing on the central government engagement, I think yes, there has been some politics in the last 12 months, but it's been incredible how, because of the focus on London housing delivery, either positively or negatively, that has just transformed the engagement that we've had with the officials. The officials now are looking at what can we do to try and support housing delivery in London. And as you say, Tom, we're not getting everything that we want, but we are having those strategic discussions in a way that we weren't previously. And I think the Housing Delivery Task Force has put us in a really good position to have a solid evidence-based set of requests that we're making, and we're having really good ongoing discussion with government officials right up to the Director General level. And actually moving on to local government, we're doing that engagement along with London councils as well, so we're really trying to make sure that we're talking to the government as a London sector as far as possible, so we can represent the views of the task force, which is very wide representation. We're there with London councils, where we've got the level of consensus which we developed through the task force process was really notable, I think. And while of course there are always going to be differences of views around the central issues of what's needed for housing delivery in London, we're really closely aligned, not just with London councils but with all of the other representatives on that task force in terms of G15 and the development community as well. So and the London Housing Panel, which was also represented on the task force too. So we've just got that consensus which we can talk to government with. I think the one area where there's still more to do is more kind of local level engagement with boroughs. The Kerslake report talked about that fragmented communication and the fact that we might be talking to them about a GLAP project and TfL places might be talking to them about a TfL project, and I think that probably still happens quite a bit. We in the GLA it's not in my area, but we're in the process of setting up a new what's called place unit, which brings together planning and regeneration and brings a new structure around area teams, and we are working to ensure that we put a lot more of our comms through that structure. We're going to make sure that housing and land docks into that properly. And I was having a discussion yesterday with some TfL colleagues about bringing TfL into that as well. So I'm hopeful that through that structure we can improve on that part of the engagement with local authorities as well.
Okay, great. And I don't know which of you are best to answer this, but the element of community engagement. I know that we've previously discussed with you, Graeme, the problems of planning that you raised earlier on, the problems of getting things through, and objections, and there, the need to have a more consistent approach to community engagement around developments is potentially something that would help things to get through more smoothly, but also change what things are brought forwards in response to community concerns. What have you done? That's definitely part of the recommendations within Kerslake. What have you done to respond to that so far?
Well, I mean, I'm engaging with the London Housing Panel regularly, of course, and Dinah, the chair, sat on the London Housing Delivery Task Force and was very active in providing the voice of the panel throughout that process, made some really important contributions. And of course, I think particularly on the planning side, I think the GLA is doing great stuff in terms of community engagement. I mean, the Planning for London programme, which of course is looking ahead to the next London plan, I think it's had something like 60 engagement sessions, something like that, maybe even more, with organisations, many of which are community organisations, as we look to shape the next iteration of the London plan. I've been doing quite a lot of engagement recently with community land trusts. So I'm meeting quarterly with London CLT at the moment, in particular around some of their sites. So I do think there's an awful lot of community engagement going on, along with the engagement we're doing with other parts of government and other stakeholders.
So you do feel that each part of the GLA Group is now engaging more consistently with local communities when it does its development, when it plans the development?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I've touched on a few areas, and I know TfL, for example, for Graeme Places for London, do an enormous amount of consultation work, particularly around their big schemes. I think Graeme might come in on that.
Sorry, Graeme, your schemes are a little bit iconic in this respect.
I think it's if you look at large schemes that we're involved in, like Edgware, well over 100 events have been run for that scheme, and that's one scheme. We're probably doing as much development as anyone around London, certainly in a large number of London boroughs, and there's no avoiding the fact that it's just hard yards. I think the challenge here is, how do you hear from the widest possible range of people who've got views about a town centre? It's quite easy to hear from people who already own a home, who don't want to have the inconvenience of development happening in their town centre. I think if you're trying to hear from people who are time poor, if you're trying to hear from people who may struggle to attend an event, even held locally, even held in the evening because they've got childcare or other responsibilities. That, I think, is why there is no avoiding the fact that it's hard yards, it's lots of effort, it's on the ground, it's thinking about increasing ranges of technology that help you to communicate with a broad swathe of people whose voices are worth listening to on how do we ensure that we get the best outcome. I'd also let me just give you a specific example. It's quite transactional, but it's worth me just mentioning. A site that we've got, like Wembley Park, we are due to be building play space at Wembley Park. The easy thing to do would be for us just to build the same play space as we might have built elsewhere, but we do know that the play space for teenage children tends to be used almost exclusively by boys rather than girls. The easy thing to do is to build basketball hoops or skateboard parks. Therefore, we worked in that case with children from the nearby Arc Academy and got school children, particularly teenage girls involved as to what are the reasons why they don't use play space that's currently available, and how could we create something in which they felt more engaged, safer, would be more likely to use. So, you know, it's hard work. If you want to create the best scheme that you can, if you want to make it attractive to all Londoners, there's no avoiding getting out, getting on the ground, locally understanding what the issues are, and reflecting as best you can the broad swathe of opinions from multiple different groups.
That's really positive. Thank you very much. And I will talk to the London Housing Panel further about their views on how this is all going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assembly Member Seb.
Yeah, thank you. I have just one question. I think I'll put this to Lynn and to Graeme, because I remember putting a version of it to you 2 years ago. So recommendation 4 is around consistency in roles to enable employees to move flexibly around the group and to support career progression. And I just wondered what progress had been made against meeting the late Lord Kerslake's challenge to you about induction training and, you know, obviously the reason why people come to work, salaries. What progress has been made against that?
Okay, a huge amount, actually. I suppose I have a hugely vested interest in this because LLDC is shrinking and is losing a lot of its talent, and I want that talent to have an opportunity to be redeployed in this part, and I've put a lot of effort into it with my colleagues. The starting point, though, is that we are 4 separate entities, 4 separate companies. As I said earlier, different terms and conditions, different salaries, different governance. We all have separate boards and so on. And different statutory responsibilities, actually. The MDCs are different to the strategic planners, are different to Places for London and GLAP. So some have planning responsibilities, others don't, and so on and so forth. Rather than seek to embark on changing terms and conditions in some organisations which are heavily unionised and wanting to get things moving quickly, we've collaborated in this space really closely to have a look at the art of the possible. So we have built a programme that is retaining talent within the family. Many of our staff, I employ about 180 people, it's a small organisation, we're simply not aware of the extent of opportunity in this group. So across our development family alone, we are more than 500 different posts. We're not doing just development. It's, as I say, it's a mix of planning, procurement, finance colleagues, HR colleagues, all support services within these groups. And my staff had no idea of how many opportunities there might be in Places for London. So there's been a big programme of awareness. We've had a whole staff away day last June. We'll have another one this June. We have focused on supporting staff through building that awareness. We have a newsletter now that goes to every member of staff in our group. We have a number of shared events around professional development. We have a number of networks of expertise across the group. I mentioned design earlier, with planning and land assembly coming forward, and we also have one coming forward on socio-economic activity. So we're all working in the socio-economic field, but we're all doing it differently, and we're not really using all of the best practice at our fingertips. We have had numerous secondments and internal recruitment opportunities. So some of my people have gone to work with Graeme, they've gone to work with David Luntz on, say, the socio-economic side, around how we're using best practice templates in the market for working with developers on socio-economic outcomes. And we've really opened it up to the family to move about. What's coming next is better alignment across job families. So GLAP, LLDC and OPDC are aligning their job families so that the job descriptions look a lot more akin to each other, and we're starting to look at salary benchmarking across the piece for those groups. We have started a lot of work on EDI initiatives. We all have a different policy. We're all working in different ways to bring new talent into our organisations. So we're looking at cross-group apprenticeships where we might bring in diverse apprenticeships, starting their careers and coming and spending a bit of time with each organisation to really understand how each organisation works. So a kind of step apprenticeship programme. TfL are the leaders in this space. They have a fantastic apprenticeship programme that we could take advantage of in meaningful ways, so sharing intelligence there. We've just appointed a learning and development dedicated post for 12 months to bring all of these strands together. We're all holding separate webcasts on various subjects that cover all of our areas. Why don't we have a single land assembly teach-in where we all plug into it? So there's a huge amount going on the talent piece, and the one thing I really want to champion is we've just signed off at senior level with the GLA a redeployment policy that means that every person who's displaced from LLDC is going to get an opportunity to be redeployed in the group before jobs go outside for external recruitment. So that's really good because it's helping us reduce costs, reduce redundancy in each organisation. Because we're separate entities, we can't simply place people in another area. We have to go through a process. But we've agreed across the group to give people the chance to get a job somewhere else in the group by guaranteeing them an interview if they have the right skills for a new job coming up, which I'm really pleased about.
It is extraordinary the amount of progress that's been made of this, and you know, I've said to Lynn before, if you were to put on a map all the development sites that cover you know, GLA, Places for London, LLDC, MOPAC, you know, it would be a vast number of dots covering a huge amount of London. And you know, sending this message when we're recruiting that once you're into the GLA family, you're into an organisation that in terms of land and development is shaping vast swathes of London. I talked about 90,000 by the 2040s between Places for London and the GLA. If you add in LLDC, OPDC, you're well north of 100,000, and the opportunity there to be involved in land and development and planning with a social purpose is just enormous. And I think you know, we are very lucky in terms of the talent we have here, and I think that, you know, making sure that we're really selling the opportunity when we're recruiting for coming and working within the GLA family, I think is really important.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, or?
Only really just to emphasise something that Lynn's already said, which is that structure is important, you know, the frameworks, the sharing of information and the process that goes with that. But a lot of it just comes down to people. So someone like Paolo Nistri, who came in on secondment from Lynn's team to head up our construction skills team, Paolo's a fantastic resource for us to use, but Paolo then brings all the network that he already knows. So there's now much better contact between the teams because you've got people who are talking together. I think we've moved away from a world in which occasionally we might look to poach people from each other and instead say this is resource that has to be shared, and how then can we make the best use in the round. I think we're all a little more grown up and a little more aware of the fact that we've got to come up with the right answer in the round, and sometimes that means a willingness to share and certainly to give our people the career path, the opportunities for development, and be a little less precious about wanting to keep our best people, and recognise that actually we all gain from each of us having people who move elsewhere in the family, or indeed having other people who come into our own teams.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Saki, Assembly Member Sheikh.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to the panel. I think it's been really fascinating to hear about the progress that's been made since the Kerslake review, and particularly around the coherence that's been built up in the GLA Group and the family. I'm going to move us on to a section to do more with the recommendations 8, 9, 10 and 13. You know, looking at, I think as it was put in the Kerslake review, if the GLA was to continue delivering homes and expanding and growing, it would need to become, to quote, more interventionist. So to that end, I think I'll start with yourself, Marc. If I pull out my specific questions, what is your perspective in terms of what the GLA's view on the appropriate level of intervention the GLA should be making in the housing market? And then I'll hand over to yourself, Deputy Mayor, and anyone else who wants to come in.
I mean, I think we've talked a lot about the issues that we're currently facing. We'd like to be the most transformative force that we can be in terms of housing delivery and accelerating specifically the delivery of affordable housing. The reality is somewhat different, obviously, in terms of what we can do. But really, when we embarked on the work for City Hall Developer, the very simple question that we were asking ourselves and asking others was, how can we help? How can we be additional and complementary to what is actually happening, rather than duplicate and replicate? And so we embarked on some work with Business London. We had several roundtables and workshops with senior representatives from the development industry, so housing associations, local authorities, house builders. And we were asking this question, being very open-minded, what do you think the issue is? What do you need from us? I think there were some very consistent messages. The first one was perhaps more of a negative one, and it was about, if the GLA was to upscale its activities and involvement in housing delivery, might that come to the detriment of existing housing delivery that is happening? And the reality of this is really the scarcity of talent that we have as an industry. So there was this worry that I think Graeme kind of just expressed within the GLA Group, but at a wider level in terms of poaching staff and actually kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, actually, in terms of promoting additional delivery. The more positive kind of knock-on response to this was actually, the industry is ready to work with us. That talent exists. The resources exist. We just need to utilize them better and kind of turbocharge them, so to speak. And the consistent message was we want to do more partnership working with the GLA. We've got something to add to the table that other counterparties cannot. We're a statutory authority, we're a strategic authority, we've got connections to local authorities, to communities. We understand policy in ways that your average developer or housing association perhaps does not. We've got access to grants. We've got access to Section 203 powers, for example, when it comes to land assembly, rights of light, etc., which your average counterparty cannot utilize. We've also got powers as a public body that the market cannot compete with, in the sense of being able to act in a way which is not market-facing, so taking slightly more risk, taking reduced returns, providing subsidy in kind of direct and indirect ways that your average developer cannot. And because the scale of the issue is huge and projects that were once viable are not, that kind of additionality, I think, is really even kind of more additional now in the current context than it would have been in the past. Now, the reality of having, I guess, a program which is expansionary means that we need a lot of capital to do that. I mean, building homes is incredibly expensive. It's probably one of the most expensive things that you can do. And I think that the joint venture and partnership working response is probably the most responsible one to do that. I mean, effectively, we're sharing the cost of delivering the homes with the private sector, sharing the risk and the reward, and trying to act in a way which is, again, different from what they can get from your average equity investor or hedge fund or whatnot. And I think this is where we've landed. We're already working on projects at the moment, looking at partnership working, getting homes delivered as quickly as we can. But, we got to start somewhere and then build on that. We can't do everything all at once.
Thank you very much, Marc. That was really helpful, and I think it sort of begins answering. I've sort of had 2 or 3 questions I wanted to ask, but I think naturally this kind of quite broad open question to begin with folds into all of them. So you sort of, I think, have answered the question I wanted to ask you around risks that you might have identified with that level of intervention in the market, as well as why at the moment we're choosing to go and pursue joint ventures. So Deputy Mayor, I don't know if you wanted to comment on any of the aspects of how we become more interventionist.
I would do, because this is an incredibly exciting area of work and a huge undertaking as well, I have to say. And Marc and team have done an incredible amount of work on this, and it really is, work for the long term. This is about the GLA, first of all, expanding what we are already doing, and we've talked about a lot of the things that the GLA was doing in this space even before Kerslake. Kerslake gave us a really good roadmap to expand that, to strengthen that, to become more muscular in a lot of these spaces, and then in the next mayoral term to be able to do even more. I want us to be much more expansionary, and that's what we're doing. The mayor has land, the mayor has planning powers, the mayor has CPO powers, the mayor has housing investment powers, the mayor has infrastructure funding, the mayor runs the transport authority. City Hall, the GLA and the GLA family are in an incredible position to be able to enable and enhance development. And actually, although times are really tough now, and we've talked a lot about this, and that affects us just as much as it affects private developers, short of the government coming to us with a massive pot of money, which they haven't done. We're affected by that. But as I said earlier, we are working with our delivery partners, with the partners that we're working with on land, to really keep things going, to get us in a really strong position for where the market bounces back. And there are some absolutely, I wish I could talk more about them, but of course these are sort of ongoing discussions. But there are some fantastic opportunities on the table, even at the moment, notwithstanding all the economic difficulties that we are engaged with. And Marc's talked about joint ventures. The sector really is in a space where they're looking for joint ventures at the moment. They're looking for risk sharing because of the environment. And for us at the GLA, going back to Marc's sort of first point, how can we help? Where can we add value? I was thinking, Ronald Reagan couldn't have got it more wrong when he said the most terrifying words were, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." Well, you know what? We're from local government and we're here to help. And when development partners hear that, their ears prick up because, we are in a fantastic position to be able to support the sector in a very, very difficult time.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I don't know if anyone else wanted to come in on that. Otherwise, I'm going to come back to you, Marc, around joint ventures, a little bit more information. So you've talked about, I guess, it being the best model to share risk. So could you tell us a little bit more, actually, about the benefits, but also the drawbacks from joint ventures for the GLA?
Let's perhaps start with the drawbacks. And I think it is a response to, I think, this change in terms of wanting to get our hands dirty and having this step change in risk attitude. The standard way of delivering homes for the GLA, and I'm talking about the GLA strictly speaking, not TfL, has been through development agreements. They're a fantastic way of delivering homes with relatively little risk for the public sector. We just offload obligations to developers and we require payment for the land. That is basically how it works. It's obviously a bit more complicated than that, but it works well when there is a lot of competitive tension in the market and there's a lot of demand for land. It works less well when you've got projects that are challenged and that need to be renegotiated. Obviously, if we're doing a joint venture and we're sharing the risk, if the project is not getting planning, it's getting delayed, if cost inflation is happening, we are equally exposed to the private developer depending on the level of shareholding that we have in the joint venture. So there are financial and reputational risks in doing these projects, but I don't think that we should shy away from doing that because this is what the sector wants, this is what the sector needs, and we need to deliver homes. And this is the best response at the moment to doing that. The benefits are that basically we've got a more flexible structure to deliver homes, one that is more resilient to shocks and changes. A joint venture is basically an agreement to partner. If things change, we'll have to adapt. If we have to get a new planning application in, we'll get a new planning application in. If we have to change some of the parameters and phasing of the project, we'll be part of the table making the decision and voting on this. And we'll have transparency on how the project is actually performing. I think that the issue with development agreements is that it creates a distance, because obviously we're not sharing the risk and reward. Why would the developer be forthcoming and transparent with you about what is actually happening on the ground? if you're actually sharing all the costs and the benefits every day with them, that information is shared and needs to be shared, and you can make an informed decision.
Thank you. I feel like I need to spend more time digesting this. So with
speed up a bit.
Sure. So with the development agreements, you've sort of identified, I guess, shortcomings in our role in the governance of it, or foreseeing the application throughout and therefore control. And particularly, I wanted to ask around interest in the land and our control on affordable housing requirements, particularly with development agreements, but more broadly the joint ventures. What do those negotiations look like, and how strong is the GLA's hand in that conversation?
We actually have quite a lot of control in development agreements, perhaps in ways that are almost disproportionate to the level of risk that we're taking. We mandate things from the procurement to the contracting. So if a project was procured with 50% affordable housing, it needs to deliver 50% affordable housing, and that's in the contract. The issue with this, I think, is that it is relatively inflexible. So if things change and the project is not performing as well as it should have, then we are basically stuck with a contract that was entered into and that cannot adapt to changes. A joint venture is a more dynamic approach to development, and you can mandate things in the agreement for lease for the land and the joint venture agreement, etc., about levels of affordable housing, for example. But you can also set things such as, for example, sustainability requirements as targets. And you know that if the project is performing as it should, you can try and outperform on other criteria. Whereas the development agreement is just set in stone.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Lynn, you look like you wanted to come in.
I think there are real benefits from joint ventures, and I know Graeme will have huge experience here as well. You have a line of sight to what is going on at in the financials and a seat at the table. And often, if you enter into a development agreement contract, you simply don't have that line of sight, because there's no obligation for that developer to show you the in-depth numbers of what's going on in their scheme beyond a simple viability assessment. And there are areas of viability assessments that can be invented, frankly, and have been in the past. And so that's challenging. I don't really like development agreements because I have this theory that we in the public sector should hold on to value in public sector land. And what we haven't spoken about is reward. Now, we're in a bad market at the moment, but the market will eventually pick up. And the public sector, in my view, should be looking to keep an interest in land over the longer term. And therefore, particularly for big schemes, the likes that GLAP is running, in time, those schemes may well be worth a lot more than we think they're worth today. And in the interest of the taxpayer, I think we should keep our interest in and keep a seat at the table. And that's kind of my philosophy, really. And there might be some experience that Graeme's got where he's actually seen value come out of some of those joint venture initiatives that Places for London are involved in.
Thank you, Lynn. Chair, before I hand back to you, I'm just going to bring Graeme in on joint ventures specifically, your thoughts on it, and also development agreements. Then I'll hand back over to the Chair. I think.
Very quickly, it's our preference for large sites, or where you've got groups of sites, critically because you do have more control. You've got control up front, as has been said, on things like levels of affordable housing, parking policy, sustainability more broadly. We tend to prefer 50-50 joint ventures, so you've got an equal stake, but critically the different parties bring different things. So we're we can be strong on things like the engineering elements, but not try and tell a house builder how to build a home. So it's just being clear about where you've got mutual trust, mutual respect, but you're not trying to do each other's jobs, but you're there to ultimately make the joint venture successful. I think as those things evolve, it's easy to think about a joint venture as being on one site. I think things get more interesting interesting if you're thinking about how you can have an ecosystem of joint ventures that can come together to really create a proper mixed-use community that works, particularly if, and Lynn's already mentioned our collaboration agreement with Network Rail, if you're in a position where you're bringing different public landowners together in potentially different joint venture partners in an overall master plan that meets the needs of that local community in that town centre, that really is where we're looking to get to. And then there's separate issues as to what extent do you want to crystallise value up front, for example, by the public sector taking forward planning itself so that it sets out the rules for the game. In terms of risks, I think the biggest one is you need to have alignment of interest. You know, these are partnerships that can last for years or decades. You need to have organisations with whom you've got shared culture and shared ambitions.
That's so much food for thought to the panel. Thank you, Chair. I'll hand back over to you now.
Thank you, Assemblymember Devonish.
Thank you very much. I think these have been partly answered, Chair, so I won't repeat myself. But to Marc, and please, if you can answer, please do. If you think you've answered, just say you answered. When will the GLA complete its business plan setting out how the first stage of the City Hall developer will be implemented, please?
I don't think I have answered this yet. So I think instead of thinking about a programmatic business plan for City Hall developer, what we're focusing on at the moment is the GLAB business plan, because GLAB is affected by everything that we've talked about in terms of the development industry and cash flow impacts. What we're also working on is a very large joint venture proposal, and we're working on a business plan for this one. And there's a lot of work to even manage this particular piece of work rather than talk about something much larger.
Thank you. And next question, Deputy Mayor, why is the GLA exploring a further land fund, and what activities would this enable, please? And then I'll follow on with Tim after you, Tom.
Well, I won't repeat what I've just said about the success of the existing land fund because of time, but of course we're pushing for more land funding. It's disappointing that the 150 million didn't come to the GLA, but we'll be pushing very strongly for any further brownfield land funding to be devolved to the GLA. And the Mayor has set out an ask of government, £470 million, which would enable us to unlock around 70,000 homes around London.
Thank you. Very short and to point. Tim, anything to add? You can say no.
No.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry. Thank you very much. I was just looking at the GLA Small Sites portal, which is what my question is about. It's looking very nice. The search works, which is unusual for one of our websites. And so does it now contain all of the small sites in the GLA Group's ownership? I can see, I think, 47 sites there at the moment.
Tim, I'll bring you in on this one.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I mean the small sites, small builders programme is where we're seeking to consolidate work on small sites around the group. It was a programme which was set up before Kerslake for a kind of limited period, really to kind of focus on supporting SME builders, but with Kerslake it got a real injection of investment, and we sought to use that as really where we're funneling our work on small sites too. In reality, over the last couple of years, the small sites activity around the group has been really focused with TfL, with Places for London. We've worked really closely within the GLA team with the Places team on getting around 20 of Places sites up through the portal, and that's been brilliant, not just for those sites, but we've also really worked on approaches, and we're looking to develop best practice and all the rest of it using TfL's examples for others to build on. As it stands at the moment, MOPAC and the Fire Brigade haven't been in a period of disposal of small sites. MOPAC, we've been really focused with them on working on a broader overarching MOU such that when they have got land to dispose, that we at the GLA can support them with that and lead on those disposals.
There are some MOPAC sites on the site at the moment.
Are there?
Well, I've been clicking on the different links. You can't filter by part of the GLA Group.
Yes, the issue with MOPAC in terms of sites going forward is they're still working on their estate strategy. So that means that they haven't been in the position to sort of be looking at disposals. We do have a sort of an understanding with them, though, that where small sites come through from MOPAC for individual residential properties, these could be used for specialist and supported housing projects related to victims and survivors of domestic abuse.
Okay, thank you. Look forward to seeing it filling up even more then. And then, as I understand it, the original purpose of this was to bring together even more sites across the wider public sector. Mm-hmm. How is that work going? I can't see anything outside of the GLA Group there.
Yes, so there have been sites that have come forward from London boroughs in particular. So I think, if I've got this right, about 60% of the sites that have come through have been from TfL. As Tim has mentioned, that's been sort of the predominant source of sites. But there have been small sites that have come through from other parts of the public sector as well, like London boroughs.
Okay, great. And are you reaching upwards as well? Obviously, there's the slightly well-known Ministry of Justice building by Pentonville Prison, which we're trying to get hold of.
Yes.
In Islington, obviously. These are things that I think are held up mainly just by inertia, that we might stimulate some activity on if we were to reach out more broadly.
I mean, I have to say, the borough of Islington have been absolutely tenacious in trying to get the Ministry of Justice to do something useful with that site, and unfortunately have been unsuccessful. But were there to be any changes that perhaps meant that the Ministry of Justice's ears were open to this, we'd be delighted, of course, to work with the borough to bring that forward. But that hasn't been, they haven't been open to it thus far. But of course, I think we'd be wanting to work with any part of the public sector on small sites, including sites owned by government departments.
Can I just add very briefly on that specific point? One of the things that DLUC officials have said to us as part of this London housing delivery drive is, if there are other government departments which have got sites which are kind of not playing ball, let us know. So, there's perhaps something we can do in terms of highlighting some of these sites to DLUC, and that they might be able to do some of that lobbying on their side too.
Can I just add, sorry, because I couldn't find the number, but 15 landowners have committed to using the Small Sites, Small Builders portal.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think we'll keep a close eye on that. I think it is one of the goals of the committee to broaden the number of smaller businesses being able to be involved in.
I would add as well that the programme itself, obviously you've got the portal, which is fantastic, but the programme itself is also funding sort of projects and pieces of work within boroughs themselves, for example, around expanding the availability of small sites. So, for example, London Borough of Hackney has received funding in order to do some work on finding gypsy and traveller sites, for example. So I think it's important to recognise that you've got the portal, which is really important, but there's also wider support that's going out there as well to help bring sites forward.
Super, thank you.
I was just going to mention one thing on small sites, just to emphasise we are big supporters of the programme, but it was just to say that small doesn't mean straightforward. So both in terms of the engineering issues we have on large sites also exist on small sites, and actually I think we found that the smaller developers have required hand-holding in order to allow them to take the sites forward. Now that's fine. And again, we've been grateful for colleagues from across the GLA family in order to help enable these developers to take forward sites which, although small in our context, may be larger than those developers have managed in the past. But again, just to emphasise, we're huge supporters of the programme, but it does require a significant intervention in order to bring these sites forward.
Thank you very much. Did you quickly talk to Tim and the Deputy Mayor about your procurement framework? What has the GLA Group done to review its procurement framework as recommended by the Kerslake review?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the review of our procurement framework has been ongoing. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find the... Okay. Thank you. Yes, so...
pointed you to the wrong place.
I think you pointed me to the wrong place, Tim. But yes, basically, we are looking at our procurement framework in light of some of the changes that have been happening at the moment. The government, it should note, has also been reforming or proposing to reform procurement law. So we've done extensive background work and engagement with representatives from across the GLA Group to understand, what they need in regards to a procurement framework and the best way that we can respond from that. And we've had a lessons learned process from LDP2.
Thank you for that, Deputy Mayor. I just want to come to Lynn with the final two questions. I'm going to read this, Lynn. It says, what are you doing to ensure that LLDC's transition prioritises collaboration, cost efficiencies and key talent, including that of diverse talent? Of course, you spoke at length about what you're doing about talent, but in that particular arena.
Yeah, what the this collaboration programme has enabled me to do is, as I explained earlier, really open the doors to opportunities for LLDC. So just to remind you, the planning powers go back to the boroughs on the 1st of December. The geography, therefore, for LLDC is shrinking, as is the governance and the staffing, by at least half. We still have quite a lot of development to do, so we'll have a core development team, but a lot of our development colleagues will move on, design colleagues, planning colleagues, and so on. And so the collaboration between us has been really helpful for me to make the most of that for the staff group. Transition itself is going well. The statutory instrument work to transfer the planning powers is going well. We are hugely involved at the moment in building consultation frameworks with our staff. We're making a lot of people redundant, putting their jobs at risk, more than 70 people. That's a huge number for a small organisation. So we're very focused on the consultation exercises that we have underway. So there are cost efficiencies, obviously, in the organisation shrinking. But I guess what I'd want to point to in terms of the efficiencies, and we haven't really called this out, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, is if we get our act together, we can save huge amounts of money in sharing expertise, in procurement of activity and in recruitment. And we're starting to do that in really meaningful ways, because the Paolo example of going off to work for, he's worked for both Graeme and for David Luntz in OPDC. They haven't had to go out to recruitment and spend whatever they spend, 30k on recruitment. They haven't had to do interviews and so on and spend staff time on that. They haven't had to spend time on advertising and costs and so on. It's just one example of where we've had efficiencies. In the design side of things and planning and land assembly, all these companies were writing their own strategies for all these different areas, whether it be net zero carbon, where instead of using the best practice across the group and sharing it. So we've got a lot of that going on, which brings cost efficiencies as well. So it's very hard to kind of put a number against that and say, well, that's worth X amount. But we know that it will be driving huge efficiency within the group. We're also sharing back office services. So we at LLDC are running a procurement service for development activity for GLAP, for example, which we put in place recently, where we've had shortage of resources and we found that one part of the group has some expertise in that area. So we've managed to bridge that gap and started sharing services in that way.
It sounds like to me that you're actually, through these activities, following the recommendation of the Kerslake review. But one of the recommendations was that this change in LLDC's circumstance means that they could be absorbed into a single City Hall developer model. You know, you could be joining one of your
yes.
left behind colleagues as well.
Yeah.
Is that something you're working on? Is it desirable? Is it possible?
Well, it's certainly not off the table, because at the moment we have a number of development entities doing similar things. So there's nothing off the table in terms of future shared services where we might actually put people together. We already, on our joint ventures in the park, I mean, we value localised experience, obviously, in the park. But we already have the GLA sitting on the board of our joint ventures through Simon, who sits on our board. So we share seats at the board of the joint venture companies so that we've got that across the piece. So I don't think it's off the table, and especially if we thought it could drive really further efficiencies in the longer term. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. That brings us to the end of our question and answer period. I'd like to thank our guests for their contributions today. I don't want to tell the Deputy Mayor he's doing well for political reasons.
Well, can I say, Chair, just to say, obviously, as I mentioned, starts my last meeting with you before the election. So good luck to all of you who are up for re-election this time around, and maybe see you on the other side, subject to the whims of the electorate.
The politicians in the room will really appreciate that, Tom. Thank you. And look, politics to one side, we want your team to succeed. It's important to Londoners. For me personally, as a chair of housing, it is the single biggest thing that can happen in London to solve this housing crisis, and you are a team at the very least who are trying and constantly trying to be innovative, and we thank you for that. We have a small amount of business to look after now, official business. You are welcome to stay, but I'm sure you'll prefer to be released to the world. Thank you for turning up. We're just going to go for our business and then we'll bang the gavel. Can we note the report and today's discussion?
Noted.
Can we delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree the output arising from this discussion?
Agreed.
Can we note the work programme for 23-24 assembly year?
Noted.
What's it says here? I'm just...
This is our last meeting. Are we finished, aren't we?
It's just no. I've got one more.
Oh, we've got one more.
Sorry, so it was hugely informal.
Yeah.
May have one more.
The London Assembly meeting due to take place on May 2024 will decide which committees to establish in 24-25 Assembly year and a timetable of meetings for those committees. So as we come to the end of the year, I have no urgent business. I declare this meeting closed.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.